Summary on Spanish exploration and the long-term impact of Spanish exploration, just to kind of tie up some pieces and clarifications. The first thing I want you to see is just, and you guys picked up on this, but just how diverse the cultures of the Americas were pre-European contact. You have numerous tribal groups, and this is just North America, going from the Arctic Ocean, all the way through the Caribbean. Different languages, different lifestyles, some very advanced civilizations, and primarily quite a few hunting and gathering groups as well. And then as you work your way then into Central and South America, you get some very advanced civilizations with the Aztecs. The Aztecs, uh, outside of present day Mexico City, organized trash pickup. They had these things called chiampas, which allowed them. They would lower water levels, which created these very lush islands where they would grow crops, and they would grow crops to support a city of 200, maybe 250,000 people. Okay, the Mayans were doing some things regarding their knowledge of stars, building, and mathematics that we're still trying to figure out how they did it today. And then you get into then the Inca Empire, which spanned this large amount of space along the coast of South America, primarily in present day Peru. That that was very advanced as well. Now we do have to, as we look at this and we look at the diversity of these cultures, we also have to come to grips with the fact that these three most advanced of American civilizations, kind of the paradox of their cultural rituals, which had quite a bit of human sacrifice in it. But that also gives us an example of the variety of these very different cultures. And that the other thing I think for us to remember that's really important is that when you look at this, we're estimating hundreds of millions of people that lived in the Americas pre Columbian European contact. And here's your big, and I mean this is one of the explosive pieces of world history. Like, this is one of those just takeaways for everything, is the Columbian Exchange. And it is the movement of goods, products, gosh, animals, diseases, between what we're going to call the old world, which is Europe, and the new world, which is America, the Americas. And it's one of the biggest cultural demographic shifts in world history. Like, the world changes because of this. Now, specifically to the Native Americans, it's disease. European diseases came to the Americas and wiped out those cultures. And in your research, you guys will see that that population of hundreds of millions of Native Americans, depending on what source you go to, most historians look at the loss within 150 years of European contact of maybe 50, and I've seen numbers as high as 90% of the native populations being wiped out due to European diseases. Because Native Americans had lived in isolation in the Americas for so long, they had no immunities to Native American diseases, or excuse me, European diseases, thus the way they were able to eradicate through there. Okay. Um, Beyond just the disease aspect, we also have to come to grips with the impact on Native Americans and the treatment of Native Americans by the Europeans. And it specifically starts with Columbus. Columbus looks at the Native American people. Remember, he's working for Ferdinand and Isabella. They were protectors of the Catholic faith, and they wanted to convert these Native Americans. But the routes that they took to convert these Native Americans could at times be very brutal. Even by the standards of the 1500s, some of Columbus's brutality to the Native Americans is pretty horrible. If on the island of Hispaniola, if a family leader did not bring in their quota of gold, they would get their hand chopped off, which is horrible because there's very few gold reserves then or now in Haiti, Hispaniola. So just the brutality of Columbus was even bad by the standards of the 1500s. The other thing, and this is one, and history's never easy. I always say that history's never easy. Um, you have the Spanish conquistadors. Very soon after Columbus, once Spain started to realize, wow, look at all the raw goods and resources in the Americas, all these explorers come from Spain and they want to start getting their piece of the wealth. And there is plenty of land and wealth to be had in the Americas. Um, common common men were coming to the Americas and being able to gather and explore lands that would be considered kingdoms by European standards. Just to give you a mental image, the entirety of the country of France would fit into our state of Texas. Now, think about an almost untouched landmass that goes from the Arctic. Think about that earlier visual that I gave you that goes from the Arctic all the way to the tip of South America and all the raw goods and resources that go with it. And so you have these Spanish conquistadors that begin to work through North and South America. They work their way through the Caribbean and they create vast wealth for Spain. And as such, Spain becomes the dominant world power because of all the wealth that they're pulling out of the Americas, becomes the dominant world power for about 100 years, roughly 1500 to 1588. All right. But do understand there's a trade off. So you have the Columbian Exchange, you have this movement of goods between the New World and the Old World. I think in many ways that's a positive in some examples, but it's also a negative based on what happened to the Native Americans. Because of the Spanish success, you start to have more people coming to the Americas. You have other countries. You create a competition. Eventually, the French come, the Portuguese in parts of Eastern South America, what you and I would call Brazil today, and also then eventually you have the British. So Spanish exploration obviously is a negative for the Native Americans, no question. It does open the door to further colonization and leads to eventually English colonization, which then leads to the formation of the United States of America. So we can't ignore the impact of Spanish exploration. I do want you to see there were voices in a tremendous, especially for the time period, for the priest Bartolomé de las Casas to question what was happening to the Native American people and also putting himself at risk. It's also interesting because de las Casas and his family were some of the early settlers of the Americas. De las Casas came from a very well off family and they became very rich based on their settlement. But because of that, he also saw firsthand what was happening to the Native American people. And he does become one of those first voices of, hey, if you if we as Christians want to convert these people, we have a responsibility to these people. We need to treat them as we would want to treat other Christians. Also, De La Casas, because he was trained in the law, also points out that since the Native Americans are considered citizens of Spain, that they have equal rights under the government of Spain and should be protected. So it is good that there is a voice for Native Americans. With that said, going from Columbus, and it'll be one of the themes of this class, going from Columbus through U.S. westward expansion, we're going to see a long, sad history of what happened to the Native American people as they came in contact with Europeans and later as the Americans headed west. And it does not end well for Native American populations. Okay, so I do want you to see that tone is set. All right. And finally, and we'll talk about this a lot, is the concept of push pull. I want you to be aware of the concept called push pull that I think in many ways starts with the Spanish and the Columbian Exchange. Well, when it comes to migrations of people and immigration, the push is what's bad that's happening in the home country or region that's pushing you out, and then what's good about the new place that's pulling you in. So, for instance, in the 1500s in Europe, you had religious wars, you had limited territories, you had limited economic opportunity. As such, The Americas had a pool in that you had really unlimited land and unlimited resources, which created the opportunity for unlimited success. So for the Spanish, that first pool is the raw goods and resources, which leads to an economic system that was created by the Spanish and then used by the British and the French called mercantilism, which is the idea that the raw goods from your colonies support the home country. So the colonies are there to support the home country. And Spain becomes ridiculously wealthy and powerful throughout most of the 1500s because of that. So I hope this quick take on Spanish exploration clarifies some questions. I hope that helps out a little bit. You guys know you can always contact me if you have further questions.